Make it make sense. Deep dive podcast show. Let's dive in the heart of this nation, under skies so blue, there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true.
We hear a lot about the big cases, the ones reaching the highest courts.
Right.
But sometimes they're really telling stories. They happen closer to home in the day-to-day.
Exactly. And that's where we're going today.
Yeah, for our deep dive.
We're looking at something, well, pretty remarkable. Kind of unprecedented, actually.
The FBI arresting a sitting judge in Wisconsin.
Judge Hannah Dugan, Milwaukee County Circuit Court.
And the core issue is this allegation that she obstructed ICE agents.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Right, ICE. Obstructed them from arresting an undocumented immigrant right there in her courtroom.
It's quite something.
We've looked at reports from Fox News, RedState, The Independent, and it's fascinating how differently they frame the same basic events.
Which really makes our job here important, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
We need to try and sift through those narratives, get to the facts as best we can.
Explore the different takes.
And think about the bigger picture. I mean, a judge getting arrested like this, what does that imply?
Okay, so let's start with the incident itself. When and where?
It happened on a Friday morning, Milwaukee County Courthouse.
And the person ICE wanted?
Eduardo Flores Ruiz.
Yeah.
A Mexican national. He'd been previously deported, apparently.
And he wasn't just, randomly there. He was in court on misdemeanor battery charges.
Allegedly assaulted 2 people. So not just an immigration matter at that moment.
And ICE had a warrant.
An administrative warrant? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's key. Issued by ICE itself, based on his immigration status and prior deportation.
Not a judicial warrant from a court.
Correct. That distinction often comes up in these kinds of situations.
Right. So the criminal complaint. It says when the ICE agents tried to approach Flores Ruiz, Judge Dugan told them they needed to talk to the chief judge first.
Delaying tactic. Yeah. Or proper procedure, in her view. That's the question.
And then this is where it gets really central to the obstruction charge after the hearing.
And some reports say the hearing hadn't even, properly started.
Right. There's some ambiguity there. But afterwards, she allegedly took Flores Ruiz and his lawyer out through a restricted jury door.
Basically a back way out.
Yeah, avoiding the public areas where the ICE agents were waiting.
That choice of exit is, it's going to be a focal point for the prosecution, you'd think.
Suggests intent, perhaps?
They'll argue it was deliberate. To help him evade the agents. It really raises that question. Where's the line between a judge managing their courtroom and, potentially obstructing federal officers?
And there might have been a direct verbal cue, too. One report mentioned a courtroom deputy heard the judge say something like, "Wait, come with me," to Flores Ruiz.
Right after adjourning his case.
Uh-huh. And then there's another twist, a DEA agent.
Part of the IC team, but maybe not recognized as law enforcement by the judge.
Apparently so. This agent followed Flores Ruiz and his lawyer, got onto an elevator with them.
That detail, The Independent highlighted it. It gives a clearer picture of what happened immediately after they left the courtroom.
Shows he wasn't completely, out of sight of law enforcement, even then.
Right, even with the alleged attempt to use the restricted exit.
The agent didn't understand Spanish, which Flores Ruiz and his lawyer were speaking. They then left the courthouse through a public entrance.
Okay, so they ended up going out the front anyway.
Seems so,
Yeah.
But it didn't end there. When other agents approached Flores Ruiz outside, identified themselves. He apparently tried to run.
He fled, on foot.
Yeah, but they caught him after a short chase.
So bottom line, ICE got their man.
They did, despite everything that allegedly happened inside the courthouse.
But now the focus shifts to the judge.
Exactly. Judge Dugan was arrested, charged with obstruction of an official proceeding.
That's a serious federal charge. It's about impeding the lawful work of, a government agency.
And there's more, potentially. Tom Homan, former border official, mentioned other charges.
Concealing someone to prevent their arrest.
Yeah, and that could be a felony charge.
Wow. Felonies. For a sitting judge, that's significant.
Absolutely. And the reactions. Predictably, all over the place.
Let's start with the law enforcement side. What are they saying?
FBI Director Kash Patel said Dugan intentionally misdirected the agents, argued it made things more dangerous for the public.
So framing it as a public safety issue?
And Attorney General Pam Bondi She was very blunt. Shame on her. Said judges aren't above the law.
And she specifically brought up the charges against Flores Ruiz, right? The battery, the domestic violence aspect.
Yes, emphasize that. Why do you think that focus?
Well, strategically, it shifts the narrative a bit, doesn't it? It suggests this isn't just about immigration rules, but about protecting victims of alleged violence. Makes the federal action seem more justified to a broader audience, perhaps.
That makes sense. And Tom Homan also warned against anyone impeding ICE, mentioned legal consequences.
And there was talk of a memo prioritizing investigations into officials obstructing federal functions.
Yeah. What does that signal, that kind of memo?
It signals a pretty clear policy direction, I think. The administration is taking a harder line on perceived interference from state or local officials in federal immigration enforcement. They're looking to prosecute, maybe deter others.
Okay, so that's one side. What about Judge Dugan's defense?
Her attorney put out a statement, said she wholeheartedly regrets and protests her arrest, and that the arrest wasn't made in the interest of public safety.
Which directly counters Patel's point.
Directly. And interestingly, just before she was arrested, she'd apparently denied earlier local reports that claimed she'd shielded the migrant, called them inaccurate.
So she was already pushing back against the narrative before the formal arrest. That adds another layer.
It does. It suggests her version of events might be quite different from what's in the complaint. It raises questions about how this all initially came to light.
Now, politically, this is where the sparks really fly.
I bet. Divided along party lines.
Pretty much. Wisconsin's governor, Tony Evers, a Democrat, slammed the Trump administration, accused them of attacking the judiciary using dangerous rhetoric.
Attacking the judiciary itself. Strong claim.
And Milwaukee's mayor, Cavalier Johnson, also a Democrat, called the arrest showboating, said it would scare people away from court, even called it settling scores.
Okay, that scaring people away from court.
Yeah.
What's the concern there?
It's about trust, right? If people, especially maybe undocumented immigrants or their families, think courthouses aren't safe spaces, that they might get picked up by IC there.
They might not come forward as witnesses or victims of crime themselves.
Exactly. Undermines local justice, potentially.
Makes sense. Who else weighed in?
Senator Dirk Durbin, Democrat, said it undermines public safety, tests constitutional limits.
Testing the Constitution. High stakes.
On the other side, Republican State Rep Bob Donovan called Dugan's alleged actions irresponsible, said he hoped for a thorough investigation.
So more focus on the judge's alleged conduct itself.
And Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat, went even further, called it a drastic escalation, a dangerous new front in an authoritarian campaign against judges.
Authoritarian campaign. Wow. These are really strong political accusations flying back and forth.
Absolutely. It just shows how deeply divisive this intersection of immigration and local authority is.
And the media coverage reflects this division too, you said.
Yeah, like we mentioned, Fox News highlighted the charges, Bondi's reaction.
Focusing on the alleged wrongdoing and the official condemnation.
RedState emphasized the judges aren't above the law angle. Noted this might be the first sitting judge facing consequences like this for this kind of action.
Positioning it as a matter of accountability.
The Independent gave a more detailed timeline from the complaint, included more of the political back and forth.
Trying for a broader overview, maybe?
And they mentioned that detail about a right-wing radio host claiming he reported the initial investigation.
Which adds a whole other dimension, doesn't it? The role of media personalities in potentially driving investigations. Interesting.
So let's zoom out. Bigger picture here.
This isn't happening in a vacuum, right?
Definitely not. There's this ongoing tension. The Trump administration pushing for stricter immigration enforcement, and some state and local governments pushing back or not cooperating in the way the feds want.
And this case throws a judge right into the middle of that conflict.
Puts a spotlight on the separation of powers, the role of judges. Can a judge manage their courtroom in a way that federal agents see as obstruction? Where is that line?
That's the core legal and constitutional tension, I think. Federal authority versus judicial independence within a state court setting.
And the public trust issue Mayor Johnson raised? That seems really important, too.
It is. If courthouses become seen as places for immigration enforcement actions, it could genuinely deter people from participating in the justice system. That has real consequences for local law and order.
Plus, there's the whole debate that's been simmering for years. Should federal immigration law be enforced within state and local facilities like courthouses at all?
This case just pours gasoline on that fire, really.
And the timing. There was another recent arrest, wasn't there? A former judge in New Mexico.
Yes, similar allegations involving harboring an undocumented immigrant who was also allegedly tied to a criminal organization.
So it suggests this might be becoming more of a focus for federal prosecutors, not just isolated incidents.
Could be a pattern emerging, yeah. A more concerted effort to pursue these kinds of cases against officials perceived as interfering.
Okay, so let's try to pull this together. We have Judge Hannah Dugan in Wisconsin, arrested by the FBI.
Allegedly obstructed ICE agents in her courtroom trying to arrest an undocumented immigrant, Flores Ruiz.
He was there on separate battery charges. ICE had an administrative warrant.
She allegedly used a restricted exit, potentially told him to come with her.
The charges against her are serious.
Yeah.
Obstruction, possibly felony concealment.
Reactions are intense. Law enforcement condemns it, calls it dangerous. Her defense protests the arrest.
And politically, it's a firestorm. Democrats see an attack on the judiciary. Republicans see irresponsible actions by a judge.
It really highlights that fundamental clash, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Federal immigration enforcement versus local judicial authority and courtroom management.
How do you interpret her actions? Legitimate judicial discretion or, unlawful interference?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's what the legal process will have to determine based on the specific evidence. Was it managing her docket and courtroom flow, or was it an intentional act to impede federal agents? The interpretation is everything.
This whole thing, it really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? What are the potential long-term effects here on judges, on how people see the courts?
Absolutely. Does an event like this erode public confidence? Does it make judges second-guess their actions in sensitive situations involving federal agents?
And does it maybe force a necessary conversation about clarifying the boundaries between federal power and local authority in these specific contexts?
Or conversely, is this seen by critics as an overreach? Federal government flexing its muscle against the local judge?
It's incredibly complex, so many layers, and definitely something we'll need to keep an eye on as it develops.